The Carolina Panthers season is right around the corner, which means it's time to give out our final stat projections for the team. Let's do it. The Carolina Panthers season is about to start, which means it's time to give our final stat projections for the team. Let's dive right in. Hey, folks, if you're here, one, please hit that subscribe button. It is much appreciated as we help this show grow. We are here today to focus primarily on the offensive side of the ball. Sorry to spoil it if you're a defensive-minded person. I'm sure I could spend some time thinking about stat projections for the defense with sacks, tackles, interceptions, but we know offense is what sells, at least keeps people involved with the game. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to focus on the one and only Bryce Young and his stat projection. Last year, 2,877 passing yards in 16 games, 59.8% completion percentage, 179 yards per game, 11 touchdowns to 10 interceptions, 73.7 passer rating, sacked 62 times. I don't think there's anywhere to go but up. And way back in the offseason, probably a month or two ago, I looked back at the last, 14 or 15 number one overall picks that were quarterbacks. So not just first quarterback taken, but number one overall pick that's a quarterback. And how do they fare from year one to year two? Like, was there this big jump? Was there anything that I could deduce from what I saw? And there wasn't, unfortunately. I hoped going in that we'd see like kind of a consistent bump, but things like injuries, the teams, there's a lot of factors that went into play. And unfortunately, it's not a perfect science, as we know in the NFL. It's coming into year two. There's a lot of questions around Bryce Young, at least externally, maybe even internally with some of the fan base. For me, personally, I do think we're going to see another notch. Like, it doesn't take a lot to improve. As far as like where I'm holding the bar, I think if we could get, or he could get around 33, I probably could even be talked into 3,200, but around 3,300 to 3,500 passing yards, that is a big improvement. Now, if he comes up in here and lights it up and gets 4,000 passing yards, like that's icing on the cake. But I want to keep it realistic. Let's improve, get an additional, 300, 400, maybe even 500 passing yards in a season. An additional game should help. I mean, so even last year, like if he had played the Seattle game, maybe could have gotten 3,100. He kept his pace. So I guess saying that, you know what, we're going to go with 3,500. That way we get a significant jump. When it comes to touchdowns, the interceptions, I'd like it to stay around 10 interceptions, maybe 9. Single digits would be nice. Fumbles were a bit of a problem at times last year. Not all his fault, but part of the pressure that got to him. Touchdown-wise, 25 to 27 passing touchdowns is my range. So 25 to 27 passing touchdowns with 9 interceptions, and we should see an increase in the completion percentage. I'm thinking in the 62, 63%. Like, let's get this number up a few percentiles, make it look a little bit better. But overall, like year two for Bryce Young should see improvement considering how much is invested. We should see him not on his back nearly as much as we did last year. So look for a big year. When we talk about the rushing attack with Chuba Hubbard, he's going to be the number one running back. Like, no question about it coming into this. He'll carry that title at least for 4 weeks until Jonathan Brooks comes back, and even then I think it's going to take a while to get Brooks back and accustomed and into the lineup. With that said, like if Chuba Hubbard is getting all the touches or a majority of the touches throughout the season, there's no reason why he couldn't eclipse 1,000 yards. Like if he had gotten more touches earlier in the year last year, some of Miles, he could have hit 1,000 yards because he was at 902 yards and 5 touchdowns. I think realistically, if the ball is going to be dispersed and Brooks does come back, that he may not hit 1,000. So I think 850 to 900 rushing yards is a good number for Chuba Hubbard. And this is with an assumption that Brooks is going to be back and healthy again. I think the same touchdown wise, 5, 6, 7, maybe 8. Miles Sanders is really the question mark here because I don't know how many carries he's going to get and touches. He will get a lot in the first four weeks or so. Is he going to get enough to eclipse 500 yards? Maybe, but maybe not. Last year, 432 yards, 1 touchdown. It wasn't great. And I think a lot of people would have expected these numbers between Chuba Hubbard and Miles Sanders to be flipped, but they weren't. So here we are in year 2 of the experiment with Miles Sanders. It's a big year for him because I think there's a good chance, unless he just lights it up, that he may not be back here next year. So he's got to prove that he still belongs in the league. Realistically, I think we could see a similar stat line. If he got to 500, that would be a big win. But 450 to 500 rushing yards for him, 2 or 3 touchdowns. Anything above that is fantastic. Then Bryce Young, man. Bryce Young was your 3rd leading rusher with 253 rushing yards. I'd expect him to maybe eclipse 175, 200, maybe 1 or 2 rushing touchdowns. Remember, the one that he ran in wasn't a touchdown. It was a 2-point conversion, so that's why he didn't have a rushing touchdown on his resume. And then that brings up Raheem Blackshear, who last year had 46 yards. I don't think we're going to see a lot from him, and or Mike Boone if he gets elevated. The real question is going to be around Jonathan Brooks. And with Jonathan Brooks missing significant time and these touches going around, I think I'd be holding out for maybe 300, 400 rushing yards, maybe 500. It's hard for me to give you a true number until I see when he's back, how many touches he's getting, and how involved he is in the offense, because you can only disperse the ball around so much. But expecting a good year for this group of running backs. I mean, carrying 4 and even throwing in Mike Boone that can tuck the rock is a good thing. So I like it, and I think the scheme that Canales has built around running the ball and an emphasis on it should help. Passing-wise, Adam Thielen last year, we know, led the charge with 1,014 receiving yards, over 100 receptions with 103. He was Bryce Young's favorite target. I think those numbers are going to drop this year. He likely, 800 receiving yards would be a good year. It's going to be a drop, but I think the ball is going to go around a little bit more, maybe even 750. I think he had 4 touchdowns last year, so 3 or 4 touchdowns. I'd probably keep it in that range. Jonathan Mingo really is kind of the big step up this year. He had 43 receptions for 418 yards, no touchdowns last year. I want to see him get on the board at least once or twice, maybe 3 or 4 times before this thing is said and done. He's shown the flashes. I think as we, again, disperse the ball and rely on the running game, we're probably 600 to 700 yards. Receiving would be a significant year for him. Chuba Hubbard was your 3rd leading pass catcher in terms of number of catches with 39, 233 yards. I would expect Jonathan Brooks, Miles Sanders, Chuba to kind of disperse that amount amongst themselves. So maybe combine with the backs, 450 yards receiving among the group, maybe 500, although Canales loves to get it to the backs. May not be until Jonathan Brooks is back. Deontay Johnson, of course, is the big question. I do think Johnson can get close to 1,000 yards. I mean, if we saw what Adam Thielen did, I just think it's going to be dispersed a little bit more. And again, heavily focused on the run. But I think Johnson becomes the number 1 receiver in terms of receptions and yardage, and should lead in receiving touchdowns unless we get to the tight ends. But at least from a receiver standpoint, 8 or 9 receiving touchdowns, that would be a great year. Xavier Legette is the next one on the list. Rookie wide receiver who's missed a lot of time in the camp and preseason. My expectations for him, knowing that he's probably going to be worked in a little bit slower than we anticipated, or with Mingo and the way he was thrown out there, 400 to 500 yards. So if he has a similar stat line to Mingo, that's a successful year, because he's really like the 4th wide receiver on the team right now. 2 or 3 touchdowns. Hey, kick return wise, get him involved there. Let's see what he can do with the ball in his hands, and maybe even some sweet jet motion. Just get him a few more touches. So he may have a little bit, or probably lead the receivers in rushing yards. I think that's like out of the bucket of folks. I mean, I know we have David Moore. I wouldn't expect a ton out of David Moore, maybe 200, 300 yards receiving most, a touchdown or 2. That rounds out your receiving core, at least how it is today. Tight ends, Last year was a mess. Tommy Trimble, 194 yards, 3 touchdowns. And then Hayden Hurst had 184 and 1 touchdown. And yeah, it just wasn't great, right? I know Ian Thomas barely was involved there. I think this year with the tight ends, at least centered around a better offense, I think Tommy Trimble, if healthy, hopefully, like, dude, if he can get 400, 500 receiving yards, that's a big jump. Like, just hit that mark and then get, keep 3, 4, 5 touchdowns on top of that. It's a good year. And I know as I'm stacking on these touchdowns, like, of course, they're going to be dispersed around. So I know my number for Bryce may be fluctuating a little bit, but just gauging on what I would think. Jatavian Sanders is really question number 2. And we've seen flashes. We've seen a lot. We've seen him getting involved now. I think 300 receiving yards would be a good start, like considering Trimble and Ian Thomas haven't been able to do much, and or Hayden Hurst. If he gets 300 in his rookie year, even 400, that's a big step, maybe a touchdown or 2. Jordan Matthews is kind of my next on this group when we talk about receiving tight ends and pass catchers. Jordan Matthews, who's now on the roster, the active 53-man roster, shown, hey, he can catch it, he can move it. He was a former wide receiver. He's in year 11 or 12. So for me, I think if he can be healthy and he can be on the field and we can get him involved in the offense, like 200 receiving yards would be big. If he goes well and above that, hey, that's setting some things off. So I think that really does it from the offensive side of the ball. I mean, if we talk about the offensive line, I'd love, when we talk about sack numbers, to be in the 35 to 40 range. That's a big drop. Getting 20 less sacks or giving up 20 less sacks, vast improvement. Defensive side of the ball, like I said, not really a lot to focus on. I mean, we're talking about Jadeveon Clowney. Can he replicate what he did as far as sacks? J.J. Wonnum still battling injury, so you have DJ Johnson. And out of the core of the outside linebackers and at that position, I don't know where the sacks are going to come from, but I know we're going to need them. And I also know we're going to need to turn the ball over more than we did last year with interceptions, fumbles, punching the ball out. So it's going to be a fun year, man. And Ejiro Evero's got the work cut out for him. I think this guy is lined up to be a head coach here in the near future. So it should be good. But I'd love to hear your stat projections. I guess I should throw in our good man Eddie Pinheiro as I close this out. Eddie Pinheiro has another fantastic year. Let's say 27 out of 30 field goals, whatever that percentage comes out to. Does what he's supposed to, gets a new contract here in Carolina. And, hey, fans are happy to have Eddie Pinheiro return. At least I hope they are. That's going to do it, though. I would love to hear your stat projections. Drop them in the comments. And as always, appreciate y'all for tuning in.